My husband had an entire second family, and they showed up at his funeral. I thought I knew my husband, Mark, 45M. We had been married for 15 years, built a life together, and raised two amazing kids. I trusted him completely. He wasn't perfect, but who is? I thought we had a solid marriage, one built on love, respect, and honesty. I couldn't have been more wrong. Mark passed away unexpectedly a few months ago. A heart attack, no warning signs, no lingering illness, just gone. One moment, he was fine, and the next, I was sitting in a hospital waiting room while a doctor told me there was nothing they could do. I remember staring at the doctor, trying to process what he was saying. Are you sure? I asked, as if maybe they had made a mistake, as if there was some possibility they could go back into the room and just fix it. The doctor just gave me that practiced, sympathetic look and repeated the words no one ever wants to hear. I'm so sorry for your loss. And just like that, my life shattered. I don't even know how I made it through the next few days. There was paperwork, decisions, phone calls I barely remember making. Our kids, Ethan, 12M, and Sophie, 9F, were heartbroken. My mother-in-law was inconsolable. Friends and family tried to help, but there was nothing anyone could do to make it better. I was drowning in grief, but I still had to plan the funeral. That part felt surreal. Picking out flowers, choosing the casket, approving the obituary, things that felt impossible, but I had no choice. I kept telling myself, get through today, just today. Worry about tomorrow when it comes. The day of the funeral arrived, and it was exactly as painful as I had expected. The church was packed. His coworkers, childhood friends, old neighbors, everyone had come to say goodbye. I sat in the front row with our kids, my heart feeling like it had been ripped out of my chest. The service was a blur. People got up to speak about what a great man Mark was, how much they admired him, how much they would miss him. Every word made it hurt more. I barely heard the priest's sermon. I just held on to Ethan and Sophie's hands, trying to stay upright. Then, in the middle of the service, the doors opened. At first, I barely noticed. People had been slipping in and out all day. But then I heard the whispers, the subtle shifting of people in their seats. I looked up, and everything in me froze. A woman I didn't recognize was standing near the entrance, holding the hand of a teenage boy who looked eerily familiar, and beside them was a little girl, maybe 7 or 8, clutching a tissue, her eyes red from crying. They weren't just grieving strangers. The boy had Mark's nose, his cheekbones, his eyes. I felt my stomach drop, like the ground had just disappeared from beneath me. My chest tightened, my breath coming too fast. Because I knew deep down, before anyone even said a word, I wasn't just looking at mourners, I was looking at my husband's other family. I gripped the side of the pew, my hands shaking. My mind scrambled for explanations, for anything that made sense. Maybe they were distant relatives I had never met. Maybe the boy just happened to look like Mark. But then I saw the way the woman's face twisted in pain when she looked at the casket, the way the boy looked furious, his jaw clenched like he was fighting back tears, the way the little girl buried her face against her mother's side. I wasn't the only one grieving Mark that day. The realization hit like a freight train. Mark had been lying to me. He had been living a double life. And now, at his funeral, his secrets were coming to light in the most public, humiliating way possible. I felt sick. I turned to my mother-in-law, who was sitting beside me, tears streaking down her face. I whispered, "Do you know who they are?" She looked up, following my gaze, and the moment her eyes landed on them, her entire expression changed. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. She wasn't just shocked. She was guilty. Oh my God. She knew. She knew who they were. The betrayal crashed over me all at once. The grief, the exhaustion, the heartbreak. It was all too much. My hands felt numb, my vision blurred at the edges. I wanted to stand up, to demand answers, to scream that this wasn't real, that this couldn't be happening. But I couldn't do anything except sit there, paralyzed, as my husband's real life came crashing down around me. The funeral service had turned into a nightmare. The moment I saw them, the woman and her children standing near the back of the church, something deep in my gut twisted. I had no idea who they were, but my body knew before my mind did. The teenage boy's face looked so eerily familiar, but I couldn't place why at first. It was only when he locked eyes with me that it hit. He had Mark's eyes. My hands went cold. My breath came too fast, too shallow. The woman standing beside him was holding the little girl close, like she was shielding her from something. From me, maybe. I turned to my mother-in-law, my voice barely above a whisper. "Do you know them?" She flinched. Actually flinched. Her eyes darted around, refusing to meet mine. The tissue she had been clutching was now shredded between her fingers. I watched her swallow hard before she finally whispered back, "Not here." Not here? I couldn't even process that. This was my husband's funeral. I had just spent the last week grieving, barely eating, barely sleeping, trying to hold myself together for our children. And now she was acting like she had secrets to keep? I turned back toward the woman and her kids, my head spinning. They weren't just standing in the back anymore. They were making their way down the aisle, slowly, hesitantly, like they weren't sure whether they belonged here. Whispers rippled through the crowd. My sister, who had been sitting a few rows behind me, leaned forward, her brow furrowed. Who are they? I didn't have an answer. The service was still going on, but I wasn't hearing a single word of it anymore. The woman stopped a few rows back, clutching her purse strap like it was the only thing keeping her upright. The boy, though, he looked furious. Before I could say anything, he stepped forward, his voice sharp and cutting. "You're her." I blinked at him. "Excuse me?" The woman immediately grabbed his arm, trying to pull him back, but he shook her off. His glare was ice cold, filled with something I couldn't quite place. The boy's jaw clenched. "You're the other woman." A stunned silence fell over us. My entire body went stiff. I could feel my sister tense beside me, could hear the way the whispers in the church grew louder. The woman, his mother, closed her eyes for a moment, inhaling shakily before finally speaking. "Not here, James," she murmured. "Not here." The second time I had heard those words in the past 60 seconds, my stomach turned violently. I felt like I was falling, like the ground had been pulled out from beneath me and I was plummeting into some cruel alternate reality. Me? The other woman? I let out a breath that I didn't even realize I was holding. "I don't know what you're talking about." James let out a short, bitter laugh. "Of course you don't." The woman, his mother, reached for his hand this time, holding it tightly. "James, please, this isn't the time," he shot her a look. "When is the time? Because we weren't even invited. We had to find out from Facebook that he died." His voice cracked slightly, but he quickly covered it with anger. "He didn't even have the decency to tell us about her." I could barely breathe. I turned to the woman, my voice shaking. "Who are you?" She hesitated. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she said it. "My name is Claire." The name meant nothing to me. I had never heard Mark say it, not once in the 15 years we had been together. But then she said the next part. I was Mark's wife. The air in my lungs vanished. For a moment, I stumbled back, gripping the pew in front of me for balance. The room around me tilted, spinning like I was about to pass out. "No, no, that wasn't possible." I shook my head, my hands trembling. "That's impossible. I'm his wife." Claire's face crumpled. "So was I." The past tense nearly made me collapse. I turned to my mother-in-law again, desperate for anyone to tell me this was some horrible misunderstanding. But her face said it all. She knew. She had known this entire time. I felt sick. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Claire swallowed hard. 17 years? 17. I actually had to grip the back of the nearest pew to keep from collapsing. Mark and I had been married for 15 years, which meant he had been with both of us the entire time. My mind raced, scrambling for some kind of explanation, some logical reason why this wasn't exactly what it looked like. Maybe she was lying. Maybe she was some kind of delusional woman who had convinced herself she had been married to my husband. But then I looked at James again, and suddenly I saw it so clearly. The sharp cheekbones, the same dark brown eyes, the way his lip curled slightly when he was angry, the same way Mark's did when he was trying not to lose his temper. It was undeniable. James was Mark's son. My stomach twisted violently. I felt like I was going to be sick. Claire's voice wavered. "I'm sorry, I didn't—" She stopped herself, pressing her lips together. "I didn't come here to start a fight. I just thought we deserved to say goodbye, too. Too." The word cut through me like a blade, because she wasn't wrong. I wasn't just mourning my husband that day. She was, too. And that was the moment I realized I had never really known the man I married at all. I felt like I was outside of my own body, watching everything unfold from a distance. Claire was still standing there, holding her daughter close, while James glared at me like I was the one who had destroyed his life. My mother-in-law refused to look at me, and my sister sat frozen beside me, her mouth slightly open in shock. The funeral service was still going on, but I barely heard a word of it. The priest was speaking, people were sniffling, tissues were being passed around, but in my world, everything had stopped. I gripped the back of the pew so hard my knuckles ached. My heart pounded violently in my chest, my stomach twisting itself into knots. I needed answers. Without thinking, I turned to my mother-in-law again. How long have you known? She finally looked at me, but the guilt in her expression made my stomach sink even further. She opened her mouth, hesitated, then whispered, "Not here." Not here? Again, I had just found out my husband had an entirely separate family and I was supposed to just sit here and wait for an explanation? The rage inside me started bubbling to the surface. I wasn't going to wait. I let go of the pew and turned back to Claire. You said 17 years. My voice was quieter than I wanted it to be, but it was steady. How? How was that even possible? Claire exhaled slowly, looking down at her daughter before gently brushing the little girl's hair out of her face. We met in college, she said. We were both young. We got married after I found out I was pregnant with James. My stomach flipped. Pregnant, married, she had been first. Mark had married her before he married me. Claire wasn't the other woman, I was. I shook my head, my breathing ragged. That's not possible. He never said anything. He wouldn't have, Claire murmured, because by the time he met you, he was already living a double life. A cold chill crawled up my spine. I tried to process what she was saying, but my thoughts were moving too fast, spinning wildly out of control. Mark had been living two separate lives. For 15 years, he had come home to me, kissed me, held our children, told me he loved me, while doing the same thing somewhere else. I felt sick. I turned back to my mother-in-law, my hands shaking. Did you know? She hesitated for too long. Then she sighed and whispered, yes. The church spun. I stumbled back slightly, my sister reaching out to steady me. You knew? My voice was hoarse. And you never told me? She wiped at her face, suddenly looking much older than she had an hour ago. It wasn't my place. Not your place! I nearly screamed. A few people from the congregation turned to look at me, their expressions confused, but I didn't care. Your son was married to two different women, lying to both of us for nearly 2 decades, and it wasn't your place? She looked away. I wanted to tell you, I did, but he begged me not to. I choked out a bitter laugh. Oh, well, since he begged, I guess that makes it okay? Claire shifted uncomfortably, her hand still resting on her daughter's back. I didn't know about you either, she said softly. Not at first. I forced myself to look at her again, even though it hurt. How did you find out? She sighed, brushing a hand through her hair. At first, it was little things. He traveled a lot for work. Sometimes he'd be gone for long weekends, but I trusted him. I had no reason not to. Then one day, I found a receipt in his pocket. From a restaurant I had never been to. The bill was for 2 people. When I asked him about it, he told me it was a work dinner. I knew exactly how that felt. Claire glanced at James, then continued. The real clue was his bank account. He had a separate one that I didn't have access to, and one day I saw a statement lying around. It had transactions in a city 2 hours away, places he shouldn't have been. That's when I started digging. I swallowed, gripping the back of the pew. And then? Claire's expression darkened. Then I found you. I inhaled sharply. I confronted him, she continued, and he actually admitted it. He told me he had fallen in love with someone else, that he had a second family, that he had married you. My stomach lurched. He swore he was going to leave, Claire murmured. He said he just needed time to figure everything out. He asked me to wait. James let out a harsh laugh. And like an idiot, she did. Claire flinched at her son's words, but she didn't deny it. I waited, she admitted, for years. He always had an excuse. The timing wasn't right. He needed more time. He didn't want to disrupt your life or mine, but eventually I stopped believing him. I shook my head. And yet you stayed. She let out a bitter breath. So did you. That shut me up. She was right. Mark had been playing both of us, and we had both let him. The weight of it all was too much. I suddenly felt like I couldn't breathe. I needed to get out. I turned on my heel and walked out of the church, ignoring the confused stares and whispered voices behind me. My sister called after me, but I kept walking, my heels clicking loudly against the marble floors. I pushed open the heavy doors and stepped outside into the cool air, gasping as if I had been underwater. How had this been my life? How had I been so blind? The door creaked open behind me, but I didn't turn around. Claire stepped out, her footsteps slow, hesitant. I exhaled shakily. Why did you come today? She was quiet for a moment. Because despite everything, he was still their father. I squeezed my eyes shut. Of course, as much as I hated Mark in that moment, as much as I wanted to erase every memory of him, he had still been my children's father too. And suddenly, I realized this wasn't just my pain to carry. It belonged to all of us. The weight of it all pressed down on me like a boulder. Claire stood beside me on the church steps, her arms wrapped around herself, her daughter still clinging to her side. I stared out at the parking lot, watching people trickle out of the church, some glancing toward us with cautious curiosity, others avoiding eye contact altogether. I still couldn't fully process what had happened. My husband had lived a double life for nearly 2 decades, and I had never known. Or maybe I had known. Maybe there had been signs, little clues I had ignored because I wanted to believe he was the man I thought he was. I finally broke the silence. Why didn't you ever tell me? Claire let out a slow breath. At first, I thought I was protecting myself and my kids. I thought if I just waited long enough, he'd do what he promised, that he'd finally choose. She swallowed. But he never did. I turned to face her fully. Did you love him? She hesitated, like she wasn't sure how to answer. I think I loved the version of him I met when we were young. But by the end, no, I hated him. She let out a dry laugh. I hated him, and I still let him ruin my life. I clenched my jaw, emotions swirling inside me. I didn't want to admit it, but I understood what she meant. I had spent 15 years believing in a fantasy, in a man who never actually existed. A bitter part of me wondered if he had ever truly loved either of us, or if we had just been two perfectly convenient lives for him to juggle. The church doors creaked open again, and my mother-in-law stepped out. Her face was blotchy from crying. But I didn't feel sorry for her. She had known. She had let this happen. She walked over slowly, wringing her hands together. I never wanted this, she said softly. I never wanted you to find out this way. I turned to her, my hands trembling with rage. In what way should I have found out? My voice was sharp, but I didn't care. After he died, after he had zero chance to explain himself, how long were you going to let me live in the dark? She flinched. He made me promise. I let out a bitter laugh. Of course he did, and you kept that promise, even though it meant lying to me for 15 years. She had nothing to say to that. I exhaled slowly, trying to keep myself from spiraling. You know what the worst part is? I whispered. I don't even know if I'm grieving my husband anymore. They both looked at me, confused. I shook my head. Because how can you mourn someone who never really existed? Mark wasn't the man I thought he was, the man I loved, the man I trusted, the father of my children. It had all been a lie. And now he was gone, leaving me to deal with the wreckage. I looked at Claire. What are you going to do now? She sighed. Keep going. What else can I do? She glanced down at her daughter, brushing a hand through her hair. I have to be strong for them. I nodded, feeling the same weight settle on my own shoulders. I had 2 kids of my own who still needed me. This wasn't just my grief to carry, it was theirs too. After a long pause, Claire shifted awkwardly. I don't know what you want to do about everything, but if our kids ever want to meet, they should, I said before she could finish. She blinked at me. Really? I nodded. They're siblings. The words felt foreign on my tongue, but they were true. Mark may have been a fraud, but our kids were innocent in all of this. She gave me a small, sad smile. I'd like that. With that, she turned and walked back toward her children. James had been watching us from a distance, his face unreadable, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. When Claire reached him, he gave me one last, long, unreadable look before following his mother to their car. I watched them drive away, feeling like I had just woken up from a twisted dream. This wasn't the ending I had expected for my marriage, but then again, my real marriage had ended a long time ago. I just didn't know it until now. And somehow, I had to figure out how to move forward. Without Mark. Without the illusion of Mark. But for the first time since he died, I wasn't mourning him. I was letting him go.